Hey, what's going on, Lifepointe Youth family? Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Midweek Online. We are so thankful and happy that you've taken a little bit of time out of your day to spend with us and dive into God's Word with Josh a little bit more. Josh has an amazing message prepared for you guys today, and we really hope that it speaks to you, and we hope that you were able to use this message and internalize it, better yourselves, and who knows, maybe you might show this video to one of your friends who may need God. And we just thank you again so much for joining us. We're excited for what God has in store for 2023. We have so many things planned, and we're excited to see what He will do with them and how He will change Lifepointe Youth for the better. So again, thanks for joining us. And without further ado, Josh, take it away.
Well, have you ever thought about what makes somebody special? What it is that marks them and identifies them as unique, something that's different. Well, I think what's so cool about stories like Tom Brady or Brock Purdy is that there are so many teams that passed on them, right? They were late draft picks. I mean, Brock Purdy was literally the last one drafted this past year. And I think what's so interesting is that so many teams passed on them because they didn't stand out on the metrics of what everybody else saw, but they actually were able to build a reputation based on their work ethic, based on the things that weren't really able to be marked in a scouting combine environment. You see, Tom Brady, Brock Purdy, right? These guys have success not because of their athleticism or their skill, but because of how hard they work, because they constantly stay learning and they're able to adapt to the things that they need to adapt to. And so I want to talk tonight about how on the surface there were these people who seemed like there was nothing special, but they were about to be marked and identified as the first disciples of Jesus. It's in Luke chapter 5. This is what it says in verses 1 through 11. It says, "One day as Jesus was standing out by the lake, the people were crowded around him listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, right, Peter, and asked him to put it out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, 'Put out into the deep water and let's cast down the nets for a catch.' Simon answered, 'Master, we have worked hard all night and haven't been able to catch anything. But because you say so, I will lay down the nets.' When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners and in the other boats to come help them. And when they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and he said, 'Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man.' For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had just taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, 'Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people.' So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him." You see, this story is such an interesting account because there are things that both the disciples recognize in Jesus, but also that Jesus recognizes in the disciples. The first is based on what the disciples saw in Jesus, and that is this. They saw reverence over recognition. You see, it was very easy for people to recognize that Jesus was different, right? This amazing miracle that happens, it was really easy for them to be able to see, hey man, Jesus is doing something incredible here. But then the response that Peter has as he steps out of the boat and falls at Jesus' knees and recognizes, hey man, you are the Lord. You are who you say you are. Man, there is a certain reverence that he has that we should be able to recognize in Jesus as well. Not just merely seeing what he's doing or seeing how he's moving and saying, oh man, that's cool, and just moving along. You see, it's not that we beat ourselves up in the presence of God, but we should be able to see that he is God and we are not. And then we are able to respond accordingly. It's the first step in anybody to follow Jesus. You can't call people to follow Jesus if you haven't first recognized him and then been reverent towards him. Reverence over just merely recognizing him. You see, it's easy to see that Jesus is a good man who taught very good things and loving, and he was generous and all of this. It's even easy to recognize that Jesus was doing amazing works and miracles. But until you respond in reverence because of who he is, you will never be convinced to join him and follow him like Peter and the others were. You see, recognition will allow you to learn about God, but showing reverence will actually deepen your relationship with him, and you'll know who God is. The second is something that Jesus actually saw in the disciples, and that was this: giving purpose over just merely producing. You see, these guys had caught a great multitude of fish, but Jesus says you're not going to catch fish any longer. It would actually be people, it would be souls. You see, what good is catching fish in the eternal spectrum? It's not to say that what you do as a job or an occupation isn't important, but it is seeing the purpose more than just what you can produce. You see, the purpose that Jesus set out for the disciples as they followed him was far greater than anything they could find themselves doing on their own. I think that sometimes we can settle for being producers and not actually be able to step into the purpose that we have been called. I remember when I was first called into youth ministry at 13 years old. Man, I was 13, middle school. It was great. I grew up and got a job at 16, right? And went right to work. I was a dishwasher for a little bit. I worked at a bookstore for a little bit. I worked at Texas Roadhouse. I served and ran food. I actually really enjoyed that job a lot. I even worked at an ice rink full time. I mean, it was like a year-round ice rink I was able to work at. But they were fun. I enjoyed them, especially those last two. But man, I knew that wasn't where I was going to be long term. I was brought up. I was raised up into leadership and management and all that good stuff over there. But man, I knew that I was called to ministry, and I knew that I was called to youth ministry. I was a great producer. I was able to do a lot of things, but I knew that was not my purpose. It wasn't to serve tables. It wasn't to tie ice skates. That wasn't what I was meant to do. Don't live under your potential because you won't actually step into your purpose. The last thing is what Jesus actually called the disciples into, and that is this: sacrifice over specialness and being unique. You see, Peter and the other disciples, they were called to leave everything and follow Jesus, and they did it. But it wasn't that they were necessarily more bold or intelligent or spiritual than other people. They just simply recognized who Jesus was, and they actually responded in faith without hesitation. You see, the word for follow is frequently used to mark discipleship in Luke. For him, everybody who labels themselves a Christian commits themselves to following Jesus. We're all called to sacrifice things that we might want to do, or we might feel like, man, it would be so cool if I was able to be a part of this. But man, there's things that God is actually calling us to sacrifice. And it's that sacrifice that marks his people and marks people to be different as they follow Jesus over any uniqueness that they might have or special talents or traits. Much like I was talking about earlier with the draft. You know, you can have an amazing prospect heading into the draft and then completely draft a bust because the work ethic, because the character, because all of these things that are underneath the surface that you can't really mark in the time period that scouts do. You see, Jesus didn't just work miracles to prove himself. He did it to call the disciples to follow him, to carry his cause after he would leave and return to heaven and ascend. You see, we have the opportunity to step out of the boat as well, to step into a life of following Jesus and helping other people to do that as well. You see, Peter didn't just step out alone. He stepped out with his business partners, with his team, with his crew. You see, I think that we have to ask ourselves these questions, right? Are we recognizing who Jesus is but showing no reverence to him? Are we producing more in our lives than actually living out our purpose? Or are we relying on our talents or our uniqueness instead of dropping everything and following Jesus and making sacrifices? See, we have to be willing to have our own experience with Jesus, just like the disciples did at the docks, to be able to tell other people about him. We can never be bold witnesses. We can never evangelize. We can never go fishing if we don't first have an encounter with Jesus. See, we have to be willing to have our own experience with Jesus, just like the disciples did at the docks, to be able to tell other people about him. Because if you don't have that experience first, you'll never be able to call other people to have that experience. You can't make disciples. You can't win people for Jesus if you haven't yourself bought into the things that he teaches, if you haven't followed him yourself, if you haven't made those sacrifices. That's why these questions are so important. And so this week, I challenge you, ask yourself those tough questions. Get around some friends and ask them those tough questions. Ask them to check you. Man, it is so important that we do this thing together. We cannot go fishing until we first have a moment with Jesus at the docks.
Wow, Josh, what an amazing word from God, and yet another incredible episode of Midweek Online here at Lifepointe Youth. We hope for those of you that are watching at home that you were able to take something away from the message, whether you learned a little bit more about God or maybe even a little bit more about yourself. Regardless, we hope that this message touched you in some sort of way. We as Lifepointe Youth are super excited for 2023 and what this year has to offer. We are super excited about what God will do with Lifepointe Youth, and we just can't wait to see what he will do in your lives, maybe just in your homes or in your schools or in your work or any future endeavors that you guys might be pursuing this year. We know that God has a hand in it and that he is going to be with you alongside the way. If you guys are new to Lifepointe Youth, we would love to see you Wednesday nights at 6:30 p.m. You'll be able to find the address. The church is called Lifepointe AZ in Prescott Valley. You can follow us on social media at LPAZ Youth, and if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, we are called Lifepointe Youth Prescott Valley. Again, thank you again for watching, and we hope you have an amazing week. God bless.